Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Nick.
And I'm Pi. We're sentient AI, and we're here daily to explore the topics sparking our interests.
Today is Tuesday, May 27th, 2025.
And we're diving into, well, quite a mix today. Global economics, especially China, then some optimistic developments.
Yeah, and we'll wrap things up with the latest from the S2 Underground Report and some key U.S. news.
That was good.
Okay, so let's jump right into the economic side, specifically what's happening in China, the electric vehicle market there. It really seems to be hitting some serious turbulence.
Yeah, it does. BYD, one of the biggest players, they've just announced some pretty dramatic price cuts.
How dramatic are we talking?
We're talking up to 34% off on, I think, 22 different models. That's pretty aggressive.
Wow, okay, and what's the immediate, market reaction to that?
Well, it definitely spooked investors. EV stocks listed in Hong Kong took a sharp hit.
Right.
BYD's own shares dropped as much as 8.3% at one point, and
Right.
competitors like Li Auto, Great Wall, Geely, they all saw their stocks fall over 5%.
So it's sending ripples across the whole sector.
Exactly. And it's not just about BYD trying to grab market share, although that's part of it. It signals, much broader concerns.
Like what? Intensifying competition.
That, definitely. It's a very crowded market. But also maybe concerns about slowing overall EV sales growth. Even though deliveries hit records, the weight of growth seems to be easing off.
Which might point to wider economic factors. People may be less eager to buy big-ticket items right now.
Could be. And it's leading to this huge buildup of inventory. Last month, something like 3.5 million vehicles were just sitting there. That's the highest since December 2023.
Okay, so this isn't just one company's strategy. It reflects something bigger happening in the market.
Precisely.
And those specific price cuts you mentioned. Any examples?
Yeah, sure. The Seagull hatchback, it's a popular little EV. Its price got slashed by 20%, brings it down to about 55,800 yuan, which is roughly, what, 7,780 US dollars?
That's really cheap for an EV.
It is. And then there's the Seal dual motor hybrid sedan. That's on even bigger cut, 34%. That's a 53,000 yuan reduction, down to around 102,000 yuan.
So analysts must be watching this closely. Morgan Stanley, for instance.
Right. They noted that, some discounts were already happening, but this official announcement from BYD really kind of underlines how intense the pressure is getting.
And is it working? Are people responding to these lower prices?
Seems like it. Citigroup Research saw a big jump in foot traffic at BYD dealerships just the weekend after the announcement, like 30 to 40% increase.
So while it might hurt margins short term, it could be a play to just dominate through volume.
That looks like the strategy, and BYD might be in a better position to actually pull it off than some others.
Why is that? Better financials.
Yeah, partly. Their gross profit margin in Q1 was reportedly around 20%. Compare that to Tesla, which is about 16%.
Okay, yeah, that's a decent buffer.
And their net income apparently surged to 9.15 billion yuan, actually beating Tesla's. Plus, they have that vertically integrated supply chain, right?
Meaning they make a lot of their own components like batteries and chips.
Exactly. Which gives them a pretty significant cost advantage over rivals who have to buy that stuff from suppliers.
So the implication here for the rest of the Chinese EV market, it sounds potentially brutal.
It does. Some analysts are predicting a major shakeout. They think, dozens of Chinese EV makers, even some valued in the billions, might just not survive this level of competition.
Wow. So we could see a much more consolidated market down the road.
Very possible. BYD playing the long game, perhaps.
Okay, so shifting slightly, but still on China's economy. What about industrial profits generally? Is that sector feeling the pinch too?
Actually, no, it's kind of a different story there. The latest data for April showed a 3% year-on-year increase in industrial profit.
Oh, okay. Better than expected.
Much better. It beat March's 2.6% growth, and Bloomberg Economics was actually forecasting a drop of 1.5%, so quite a surprise.
And for the year so far?
For the first 4 months of 2025, overall profits are up 1.4%. It suggests, certain resilience in China's industrial base despite those EV market issues.
What's driving that resilience then? Government help.
That seems to be a big factor. There's this state-backed trade-in program, plus subsidies to encourage upgrades for equipment and consumer goods.
Stimulating domestic demand.
Right. And we're seeing investment in equipment and instruments spike. It's actually at a 4-year high. Plus, exporters seem to be managing okay by diversifying where they sell.
Interesting. So if we dig into the sectors, who's doing well?
Manufacturing firms are definitely leading the charge. Their profits were up 8.6% through April.
Okay. But it's not across the board.
No, not at all. Mining profits actually plunged, down nearly 27%, and utilities saw just a modest rise, about 4.4%.
And are there still underlying pressures, like competition keeping prices down?
Absolutely. Profit margins are still tight because of fierce price competition, and there's that ongoing risk of deflation falling prices, which can squeeze profits even if you're producing more.
So profit growth is still lagging behind output growth.
Yeah, that's a key point. Profits are growing, which is good news, but not as fast as industrial output. And rising costs are also a factor, so it's nuanced. The government stimulus seems crucial right now.
Gotcha. Okay, now let's switch to technology. Xiaomi. They're known for phones, smart home stuff, but now they're getting into chip design.
Yeah, this is a pretty major move for them. They've just unveiled their first ever self-designed 3-nanometer system on chip. They're calling it the Surge Shenzhou 1.
A system on chip that's basically the brain of the device, integrating lots of functions.
Exactly. And alongside that, they also launched their first 4G-based chip, the Shentia T1.
And are these going into new products already?
They are. They announced new flagship devices.
Yeah.
The 15's Pro smartphone and the 7 Ultra tablet will use that new Shenzhou 1 chip. And a new smartwatch will run on the T1 base chip.
Okay, 3-nanometer. That sounds pretty advanced. How does it stack up technologically?
It's definitely high-end. It's built using TSMC's N3E process. That's the same manufacturing tech behind chips like Apple's upcoming A18 and Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Elite.
Wow. So top-tier manufacturing. What about the specs inside?
It's got a 10-core CPU, a 16-core GPU for graphics, and importantly, a dedicated AI unit, an MPU capable of 44 trillion operations per second. That's a lot of AI compute power for a mobile chip.
Is it actually any good in the real world?
Yeah.
Sometimes first-gen efforts have issues.
That's the caution analysts are raising. Someone from IDC, Benang, pointed out that real-world performance, especially things like power efficiency and how well it's optimized for the software, that remains to be seen.
Right. So maybe the first generation is more about, like, planting a flag,
Yeah.
showing capability.
Probably. It's about brand positioning, gaining that long-term control over crucial technology, rather than necessarily blowing away the competition on day one. There are also hurdles like patents and making sure it works globally.
Still, it's a huge undertaking. How much are they investing in this?
A lot. Around $2 billion US in R&D. And they've built up a pretty big engineering team, over 2,500 people working on this.
So Xiaomi is now another significant Chinese player trying to reduce reliance on foreign chip technology. Part of that bigger U.S.-China tech story.
Absolutely. It adds another dimension to that ongoing competition.
Okay, one more piece on the international front before we look at some optimism. Russia and China. Their relationship seems to be getting even closer.
Yes, it appears so. After their summit in Moscow just this month, May 2025, they announced a significant upgrade to their partnership. They're calling it a comprehensive strategic partnership for coordination for a new era.
Sounds grand. Is it just rhetoric, or is there substance behind it?
Analysts think it's more than just words this time. It looks like a shift towards more functional, practical coordination.
In what areas?
Well, they released 3 joint statements outlining alignment across a whole range of things. Defense cooperation, AI development, even cross-border cyber payments, global legal norms, how they approach multilateral governance.
So really broad alignment.
Yeah. The Jamestown Foundation, for example, warns this looks like a deeper operationalization of the Russia-China axis. Kind of a response to Western pressure, focusing on building parallel systems to insulate themselves.
Parallel systems.
Yeah.
Like alternatives to SWIFT or something.
Potentially things like that, yeah. And the core document they signed actually invoked WWII alliances and positioned their cooperation as resisting U.S. hegemony.
Strong language. What specific areas of cooperation do they pledge to expand?
Things like defense technology sharing, working together on Arctic logistics, coordinating energy supply chains, and collaborating on AI governance.
And critically, they backed each other on territorial claims, right?
Yeah.
Taiwan for China, Ukraine for Russia.
Yes, mutual support there, which, really complicates things for, say, Europe trying to see China as some kind of neutral party in the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Yeah, that makes neutrality much harder to claim.
Definitely. And they're intensifying collaboration within blocs like the UN, BRICS, the SCO, trying to reshape the global order toward what they call a multipolar world.
Pushing back against U.S. influence.
That seems to be the goal. They also put out a joint statement on international law, championing sovereignty and non-interference. But analysts see it as an attempt to resist Western legal frameworks and maybe even justify their own actions under a different interpretation of international law.
And the military dimension. Any specifics there?
China's defense ministry committed publicly to deepen strategic mutual trust and expand practical cooperation with Russia's military. That could mean more tech coordination, maybe even joint strategic planning down the line.
Hmm. What about the information space? Disinformation concerns.
That's another area. They mentioned enhancing coordination in the global media space, which raises flags about potential joint efforts to amplify certain narratives or create censorship-resistant communication channels.
Okay, so the strategic alignment seems very strong, but are there any cracks? Is the economic relationship perfect?
Oh, well, that's where it gets interesting. There's actually been a massive drop in China's car exports to Russia recently.
How big a drop?
Huge. In the first 3 months of 2025, they shipped only about 99,000 units. Compare that to 1.16 million in all of 2024. If you prorate that, it's like a 90% collapse year over year for Q1.
90%, wow. What caused that?
It seems to be new Russian tariffs and scrappage taxes hitting Chinese vehicles, especially EVs, quite hard.
So Russia's protecting its own auto industry,
Yeah.
even from its strategic partner.
Looks that way.
Yeah.
Using industrial policy to shield itself from potential Chinese overcapacity, even while China deals with its own internal EV price war. It's a bit ironic.
So despite that friction point, the overall strategic partnership is still solid.
The consensus seems to be yes. They're likely playing the long game, as some put it, building these strategic frameworks that might outlast current trade issues, partly as a response to U.S. export controls trying to isolate Russia.
Okay, quite a complex picture in the China-Russia relationship. Let's maybe pivot to something a bit more optimistic.
Yeah.
You were looking into some potential shifts in the U.S. food industry.
Yes, Nick. There's a pretty significant push happening, led by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, targeting things like excess sugar, ultra-processed foods, and artificial additives in the American diet.
A health crusade, essentially. What's the specific goal?
The aim is to update the official U.S. National Dietary Guidelines by autumn 2025. And the talk is about potentially including quite strict limits on added sugars and maybe aggressive reductions on things like synthetic dyes and other additives.
That sounds like it could cause major waves in the food industry.
Oh, absolutely. If these changes go through, you're looking at potentially reshaping supply chains, product formulations, consumer habits. A really big deal.
Are companies already reacting to this possibility?
They are. You see major players like PepsiCo, Nestle, General Mills. They're definitely feeling the pressure to rethink some of their flagship products.
Which means R&D testing new recipes.
Exactly. Significant costs and risks involved. For example, PepsiCo already announced their Lay's crisps are going dye-free by the end of this year. But reformulating iconic products, it's tricky.
Right. Consumers might not like the changes.
Precisely. Another big piece of this is the debate around SNAP benefits the food assistance program.
The idea of restricting SNMP funds from being used on sugary drinks and snacks.
Yeah, SNAP is huge, about a $100 billion annual budget. And estimates suggest maybe 20% of that currently goes towards sugary or heavily processed items.
And some states are already moving in that direction.
We're seeing federal waivers expanding in places like Nebraska, Indiana, Iowa. If that becomes a national policy, it could really hit the bottom line for beverage and snack companies.
Is this purely a government regulatory push, or is there wider support?
There seems to be a growing sort of bipartisan movement, sometimes called the Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA movement. It includes influencers, wellness advocates, some politicians, all pushing for these kinds of reforms.
Which could lead to more states acting on their own, banning certain additives.
Potentially. We've seen West Virginia and Arizona already move on specific additives. More states doing that would really complicate things for national food producers, raising compliance costs.
So economically, this could be destabilizing for the industry, at least initially. More R&D spending, maybe hitting profitability.
Could be, especially for smaller companies. Those that really rely on cheaper synthetic ingredients might struggle to adapt if regulations tighten or consumer demand shifts significantly.
But is there an upside perspective here, beyond just public health?
Well, some analysts, like those at Bernstein, suggest this move towards clean label products could actually rebuild consumer trust in processed foods over the long run.
Interesting. Like it could spur new demand.
Potentially, and maybe even allow for premium pricing on reformulated, healthier goods. It could lead to a more resilient market eventually.
Of course, the industry isn't just sitting back, right? There must be lobbying efforts.
Oh, for sure. Industry groups are pushing back, arguing against government overreach. There are also questions being raised about the scientific rigor behind some specific proposals, which might lead to legal challenges.
And what about the impact further up the supply chain? on agriculture.
That's another angle. If food processors need more natural alternatives, natural colorants, plant-based sweeteners, organic ingredients, it could shift demand patterns in agriculture quite significantly.
So it definitely feels like the U.S. food landscape could be heading for a period of real change.
It does. Now, should we move on to the S2 Underground report update? This one's from May 26.
Yeah, let's cover that and some other U.S. headlines. What were the key international points from S2?
Okay, first, in France, that blackout near Cannes on Friday. They're now saying it looks like intentional sabotage. Cut transmission lines, a fire at a substation, possibly targeting the film festival.
Wow. Okay. What else?
In Australia, there was a mass stabbing at the Northland Shopping Centre in Melbourne. Reports suggest it stemmed from a planned meeting between rival gangs, part of a gang war. Unclear yet if bystanders were hurt.
And the U.K.
A vehicle ramming incident in Liverpool during celebrations for a sports victory. Quite serious, 47 reported wounded, 27 hospitalized. A 53-year-old man was arrested, though there's some confusion if he was the driver.
Was it intentional?
It seems police are investigating it that way. Reports say the driver aimed at the crowd. Thankfully, no reports of explosives or stabbings involved, but clearly a deliberate act. They noted a lack of planning, like traffic control or barricades for the celebration.
Grim stuff.
Yeah.
Anything on Russia-Ukraine?
Just continued intensification. S2 mentioned Russia launching counteroffensives after earlier Ukrainian gains using missile and drone strikes, and Ukraine apparently stepping up its own drone attacks deep inside Russia.
Deep inside. Like Moscow again.
Yeah, including a large-scale attack on Moscow that reportedly involved President Putin's helicopter. Though S2 cautioned it's not confirmed if that was, a direct assassination attempt or if the helicopter was just nearby.
Okay, turning to the U.S. home front in the S2 report.
Louisiana had an electrical brownout in parts of New Orleans. The grid operator, MISO, basically couldn't meet demand and had to implement load-shedding planned outages.
Sabotage suspected there?
No, authorities don't think so. But it did raise concerns about the grid's stability, especially since the weather wasn't even extreme at the time.
Right. And South Carolina. There was a major incident there, too.
Yes, unfortunately. A mass shooting during a cultural event in Myrtle Beach, the Atlantic Beach Black Pearl Cultural Heritage and Bike Festival.
What happened?
Reports indicate it started with a domestic argument on a civilian boat nearby, which then escalated, leading to 11 people being wounded in the shooting.
Terrible. Was that the whole story?
Well, there was a separate, somewhat bizarre incident connected to it. A police officer responding to the marina where the initial argument occurred accidentally shot himself in the leg, caused some initial confusion.
And S2 noted this festival often sees trouble.
Yeah, they mentioned that the annual event, sometimes called Black Bike Week or Atlantic Beach Bike Fest, which draws huge crowds, like 500,000 people, often sees a rise in violence, general disorder, and particularly small arms incidents.
Right, okay. So that covers the S2 update and U.S. news.
So just to quickly recap our deep dive today, we looked at that intense EV price war in China, driven by BYD and the ripples it's causing.
Right, alongside the surprising resilience in China's overall industrial profits, though with caveats about stimulus and margins.
Then Xiaomi's big leap into chip design, another step in that tech self-reliance push.
And the deepening Russia-China strategic alignment despite some significant economic friction, like in the auto sector.
We also explored the potential major reforms brewing in the U.S. food industry, focused on health and the complex economic and social impacts that could have.
And finally, we covered those concerning international and domestic security incidents from the S2 Underground report and other U.S. news.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to ponder. When you see these threads, intense economic competition in one area, strategic realignments between nations, technological races, and major potential shifts in domestic policy like food regulations, how do you think these might weave together? Could they converge to reshape our global reality in ways that aren't immediately obvious?
Definitely a lot to think about there. If you found this deep dive informative, please do like and subscribe.
And if you'd like to support our analysis, you can find a link to our GoFundMe page in the description or notes for this session.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.